Hello, hi, welcome back to another Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction long list video for 2026. I'm going slow, I know. I'm not going to read the whole long list before the shortlist is announced because the shortlist is announced in 2 weeks. But I have such a strong feeling what I've read so far. I mean, obviously, the other 8 books could be great as well, and I'm sure they will be because they're on the long list. I don't know, just what I've read so far just has blown me away. Anyway, this video is about The Matchbox Girl by Alice Jolly. This, wow. Just like, oh, wow. I've talked about in the previous videos about when I've been reading, especially like with Venetian Vespers, that I really enjoyed the story, but maybe was in some respect lacking that emotional connection or emotional response that I had from previous winners such as Hungry Ghosts and The Land in Winter, where you're reading along and it may be not your absolute favourite story from the selection, but when you take the story that you've really enjoyed plus the response that you get from reading that story, altogether it creates this overall package that just makes you, stand up and take notice. This is this book for me. Halfway through I was like, I still prefer Venetian Vespers story-wise, but this was still giving me that wow. But now I finished it, actually this is my favourite now. I don't know whether I've just been really lucky with what I've read so far in the order I've read it. I've just enjoyed every book more and more as I've gone on. I really like Eden Shaw. I loved Ben Becula more. And then I love Venetian Vespers more, and now I love this even more. I didn't know that was even possible, but here we are. This is just wow. This has to make the shortlist, and I haven't read the other 8 books yet, but this is giving me winner vibes already. I'm sure there's other books in there that will hopefully do the same for me, but at the moment, this is my winner, and yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about The Matchbox Girl. So The Matchbox Girl takes place over maybe 11, 12 years for the main part of the story anyway. And we follow our main heroine, Adelheid Brunner. We first meet Adelheid in 1934 Vienna. And she, at the time, I believe, is 12 years old. And she doesn't speak. And so she is taken by her grandmother to a children's hospital, and a particular ward on this children's hospital for children that maybe not are like other children. So what we would class that now as maybe children with learning difficulties or autism. So Adelheid herself doesn't speak, but she is fiercely intelligent. And you can tell that by the narrative, but also the way she writes as well. But there's other children on the ward. We've got Adolf, who for all intents and purposes is, an everyday child, quite intelligent, comes across quite sophisticated in situations. It's just at some points at school, he'll be a little terror. And then you've got other children at hospital, and these are not my words, this is Adelheid's words, but they call the cabbages. So it's a particular ward for children who are different to other children. And we have certain doctors and nurses here who are trying to understand the differences in these children, not to blame them for the way they are, but to find a way for them to be incorporated into society. And one of these main characters is Dr. A, who I knew this from the beginning. I don't know why, because it's not actually, I don't think we were told from the beginning, but for some reason I already knew Dr. A was Dr. Asperger. But anyway, so 1934, Vienna, Adelheid is a patient. We see them trying to interact with her, Dr. A says, one day he wants to hear her speak. And then we follow Adelheid, who then goes home to her grandmother. Her grandfather has recently died. She found out, but she doesn't believe he's dead. So she goes back to her grandmother's. They own a cafe, so she works in this cafe. We jump forward a few years to when Adelheid's 16, we're just before the start of the Second World War. And we follow Adelheid's story, who then goes back to the hospital, but not as a patient, as someone who tries to help other children. We get the impression that maybe as the Nazis are coming into Austria and the SS are all walking around. Her grandmother maybe feels it's safer for her to be at the hospital. You know, if you know your history, your Second World War history, you'll know that there was no room for people who were not perfect. And that could have been religion wise, as we all know, but that also meant people who had learning difficulties or autism, who were classed as different to what they expected the normal to be. I mean, I don't really like using that word normal, but this is the best way I can try and describe it. So we do see people disappearing, and then a new hospital is opened on the outskirts of town, which they try and involve Dr. A in. Children get sent there and they're never seen again. And we follow Adelheid as she grows up into a young woman. And what I love is the pulling in the narrative between Adelheid realising something is going on, something really bad is going on, and she knows that's down to the Nazis, but also, you know, we have, even towards the end of the narrative, how she's, you know, the scum, the English and the Allied forces, the enemies, you know, still seeing those forces as the enemies and still going on about the Führer and, you know, how the Reich will save them, but then realising at the same time that the Reich is causing a lot of misery. We have in the narrative, you know, how at first Vienna is beautiful, the scenery is luscious, and we go through the war and it just gets drab, dreary, grey. And yeah, it's that pull that Adelheid has between realising that all is not as it should be because of the Nazis, but still feeling that the Reich will save her. It's a really wonderful story, and the backstory of the war is wonderful, but the main forefront being, you know, autism in the world, how it was understood back then. So the narrative style is, as I say, from the point of Adelheid. Obviously, we're led to believe that Adelheid has autism on some part of the scale. She doesn't speak, but as I say, fiercely intelligent. And to show this, the author Jolly, she uses a number of tools, which I will say at the first couple of pages threw me. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. Then maybe 10 pages in, I was like, okay, yeah, actually, I do get it. Until I get to the end where I absolutely loved it. So firstly, Adelheid switches between referring to first-person narrative like I, you know, that sort of stuff, to referring to herself in the third person. You know, switching up kind of jars you a little bit when you're reading. Go, oh. And I'm not sure if that's like trying to make you, in any way you can, close, like some way, feel like Adelheid does in her mind. You know, her mind is racing at, you know, 1,000 miles an hour. And this is why she has the matchboxes. She collects these matchboxes to give her clarity. And when they're all in an order and she's got enough in the right order, all organised, you know, everything around her then feels organised. And when they go missing or, you know, something happens nearer the end, you feel like actually everything's going to go into a state of disrepair and, you know, crazy, but then she comes to the realisation that actually she's more than the matchboxes, even though she still has this connection that she just can't quite let go. Yeah, so we have the going from first person to third person narrative, just to shake it up a little bit. Also, the interesting use of capital letters on words in the middle of sentences. I thought this was maybe just doing it for mostly nouns, but it seemed to be, there was other, like a verb in there as well that I saw. So I can't pinpoint a particular rhyme or reason where the capital letters are being used. But it's another thing as you're reading, just kind of jerks you, just like, oh, that shouldn't be there. Just makes you stop for a second and think, oh, okay, yeah. As well as that, I do find that the narrative made me read quicker than I would normally. And this is really weird because I haven't had this with any other book that I can think of at the top of my head. Normally I read at my normal pace. I have images going through my head as I'm reading. And I still had the images in my head as I'm reading this. I'm very imaginative. But the writing style made me read it really quickly, like quite erratically, but in a good way. Almost again, like I'm relating to Adelheid on some level, as close a level as I can. Yeah, just made me read it really quickly, but not, as I say, to the detriment to the story. It actually added to my reading experience, which I thought was lovely. So like always, I like to read a little bit, like just a paragraph from the story that as I was reading just stood out to me as something really lovely that I just was like, oh, I love that. So for this particular book, it's about of a quarter of the way in, and we have Fraulein Weiss steps forward, wonders for a gasping moment if she might cry. She reaches up to embrace him. They shuffle like dancers who have lost the rhythm and both laugh awkwardly. Then she is holding him and holding him and holding him because he smells of Vienna. Except he doesn't, of course, but everything about him retains the essence of that city. And it's just really beautiful. But in that part, the holding him and holding him and holding him, no spaces between any of those letters. That's another part of the narrative, the writing style, that adds to the effect. That happens quite a bit where a word or a collection of words are repeated 3 times, no spaces in between the words. And that happens like again. I believe that's probably in there somewhere actually. But again, just another style to make you or connect to Adelheid as you're reading. An interesting thing about the chapters, so they're kind of, you have bigger chapters and then they're split into smaller sub-chapters. And each chapter either begins or ends with, I think it ends with, after my death chapter. So this doesn't really give any hints as to when Adelheid dies. This is more her now as an omniscient narrator going back over her story. So one of these chapters is actually while we know she's still alive. So yeah, it doesn't pinpoint to when she's died. So it's not a spoiler. But it's just, yeah, her being the omniscient narrator now looking back at the story that she's telling as she's telling it, just to add some extra narrative in there, just to give the fuller picture. If there's bits missing in the story that you're reading so far, it's just to add a bit more depth and a bit more volume to the story that you're being told. And it's a nice interesting mix up as well, because you have the main chapters which are Adelheid's story in the there and then you have these ending the main chapters, if you like, the after my death, kind of going back to various times through her life and the life of the people that she was surrounded by, just filling in a bit more of the story until we get to the end, which is it ties it off very nicely, explains everything. Even Adelheid in the after my death chapter at the end says, you know, I don't want to leave anything hanging, you know, unknown, any sort of like, what's the word of people at cliffhangers? That's what I was looking for. Anything hanging, cliffhangers. It's like, I don't want to do any of that. I need organisation. I need everything to be perfectly, you know, like the matchboxes, all in order. And so this last chapter ties everything off, lets you know about everything in the story that you've come across, everyone's sort of fates and outcomes. It's just wow. Like from the story, which I really enjoyed and actually was quite tragic in places, quite sad, but also uplifting in a way as well. But yeah, from the story to the writing style, which made me read differently to I have in other books, which I don't know how it did it, but you know, the way I read quicker and was jerked around by the use of the capital letters in random places, but also the repetitive words, you know, repeating words 3 times over, all of that adding to the reading experience, making me feel like I was maybe connected to Adelheid more than I've been connected to a narrator in other stories that I've read so far. It's just like, I don't know what else to say, just wow. Like this, for me, is winning. And I'll probably read another book of the short list, long list, and be like, oh, this is winning. Right. Surely my luck's got to run out now, because I've read 4 books that I've absolutely loved. I've seen a video by another booktuber who read 2 other books that didn't enjoy them as much, which I haven't read. So maybe that's where my downturn is coming. One of those books, funnily enough, I was considering about reading next, because if I want to try and get one more done before the shortlist is announced, I've got 2 weeks. And yeah, the shortest one I've got at the moment that I've bought is Sea Scraper, which sounds like it's going to be quite literary. I haven't even read it. I've read a bit of the blurb, but already it's kind of, I'm getting vibes that it's probably going to remind me of not the Land in Winter, the Heart in Winter from last year as well, which I felt overly literary to the detriment of the story. This, by the way, as well, I class bits of it literary, but it's very accessible, like very enjoyable. Anyway, I've talked about this enough. Yeah, go read it. So yeah, I'll probably do Sea Scraper next, so I can get one more in before the shortlist announced in 2 weeks' time. But that's what I thought of the Matchbox Girl. Love it. Go read it. I think it's a fabulous way of telling a story. The story itself, as I say, is really interesting, really tragic, really, that juxtaposition of tragic and uplifting. But yeah, the writing style is so different to anything I've read before. That's my thoughts. If you've read it, let me know what you think. Let me know if you've read anything else on the long list and what you think of those. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.